We move now into the fourth of the presentations today, and we welcome our speaker, Rev Associate Professor Gerard Kelly. He is the President of the Catholic Institute of Sydney, a position that he's held since 2004. Father Kelly is a Sydney priest who has been educated both in Australia and also in Canada. His particular specialty in recent years has been ecumenism, and he's well represented on a couple of major committees looking to bringing various faiths together. As he looks at Pope Francis, he's going to be asking the question about Pope Francis showing us a new way of exercising the papacy. Let's hear now from Associate Professor Gerard Kelly.
Thank you, Mike, and perhaps we can begin just by going back to that first night, for that first glimpse we had of Pope Francis as he walked out onto the balcony after his election, because I think the world became fascinated with him. And indeed, his opening greeting was informal, even familial, and his warmth towards the crowd made people around the world warm to him. And the particular optic I want to look at him at this afternoon is really how people in other Christian churches have welcomed him and warmed to him. But let's stay for a moment at that night that he was elected on the balcony, because he went on to describe what had just happened. The cardinals of the world had gathered to elect a new Bishop of Rome, he said. Now, of course, this idea of a new Bishop of Rome wasn't new. In modern times, his three immediate predecessors had referred to the Pope this way, as the Bishop of Rome. But it's also an ancient designation. And long before people would have used the word Pope or spoken of a Pope, they'd have spoken of the Bishop of Rome. And I think that reminds us, and Pope Francis, it seems to me, has been at pains to stress this, that the Pope is first of all a bishop. And by speaking of himself as a bishop, he wants to stress two things. The first is that he has a special relationship with other bishops. He's a brother with them. We call this collegiality. The bishops of the world together form a college. And every bishop has a responsibility to protect and foster the unity of the faith of the apostles in his own diocese, but also in the universal church. And the Pope presides over this college of bishops as its head. So on that first night that he appeared to the world, Pope Francis was acknowledging that his ministry was intimately connected with that of the bishops of the world. He'd be exercising his ministry in a collegial manner. Now, the second point we can draw from Pope Francis's opening words about being the Bishop of Rome is that his primary responsibility is for the pastoral care of a local church, in this case, the local Church of Rome. From earliest times, the local Church of Rome has had a prominent place in the communion of all local churches. Initially, this was because Rome was recognised as the Church of Peter and Paul. This was the church that gave preeminent witness to the Christian faith. It's the church that was forged in the blood of martyrs, those ultimate witnesses to the faith. And over time, it also became the church that other churches would turn to for support and assistance, especially when there were disputes. So the Church of Rome had the resources to make judgments about this faith of the apostles and how it was handed on and lived. So to be in communion with the Church of Rome was a sign of being in full communion in the faith handed down from the apostles. And this too tells us something very basic about the role of the Pope. He has a responsibility to protect and foster the unity of the Church. Now, the dialogue between the various Christian churches and communities over the last 4 decades has come to appreciate the importance of this ministry that promotes the unity and the apostolic faith. In other words, a ministry that is there for the unity of the Church. Let me take you back to 1993 and to the Fifth World Conference on Faith and Order. Faith and Order is one of the movements that make up the World Council of Churches. And one of the recommendations that came from that meeting in Santiago de Compostela in Spain in 1993 was that there should be a new study concerning the question of a universal ministry of Christian unity. And then, of course, just 2 years later, Pope John Paul II issued his encyclical on Christian unity, Ut Unum Sint. And in that encyclical, he acknowledged this request that had come from the Faith and Order Conference, and he invited other churches and their theologians to engage with him, as we've heard, in a patient and fraternal dialogue on this matter. And I think he set up there what I'd like to call the terms of reference for this dialogue. We needed to find a new way of exercising the primacy that does not renounce what is essential to its mission, but which is open to a new situation. They're the terms of reference. That was a bold initiative. Now, Pope Francis has referred to this initiative on a few occasions. He spoke of it just a couple of weeks ago on his recent visit to Jerusalem and his meeting with the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew. And there he focused on the papacy being a service of love and communion. But I think perhaps his most explicit reference to John Paul's request for help in finding a new way of exercising the papacy was in his apostolic exhortation last year, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. He was very blunt. He says, we have made little progress in this regard. That's blunt. He proposed then a way forward within, I think, a larger context of renewal and conversion of many aspects of church life. The larger context of the exhortation was to present something that for him would have programmatic significance and important consequences. So he was calling for a renewal not just of individuals, but of the entire church. So then, any progress on finding a new way of exercising the papacy has to be part of this larger renewal of church life. And of course, for Francis, the fundamental characteristic of this larger renewal is evangelization. He tells us he has a dream of a missionary option. And this is what is going to transform everything: the church's customs, our ways of doing things, our language and structures, so that these things can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world, rather, he says, than for the church's self-preservation. And in that context, he says, the papacy needs a pastoral conversion. An interesting choice of words, a pastoral conversion. And that to me had echoes of Pope John XXIII's call at the opening of the Second Vatican Council. Pope John didn't call the council to deal with specific errors, but in the awareness that the church was living in a new time when the world was rapidly changing. And he wanted the church to find ways to respond to the new challenges. It was not a question of defining doctrines or of correcting errors, but of finding a way to speak to the modern world and to allow the fruits of the gospel to flourish in the lives of the people. And that's how I think Pope Francis is thinking about the conversion of the papacy, this pastoral conversion as he calls it. In his mind, the thing that is fundamental to the ministry of the papacy, the ministry of Peter, is that the Pope offers the gospel to the world and that he proposes it in such a way that it will flourish in the lives of the people. And you know, I wonder if he thinks that after almost 20 years of this patient and fraternal dialogue called for by Pope John Paul II, a dialogue with theologians in other churches and other communities, I wonder if he thinks that perhaps now the initiative lies with the Catholic Church to demonstrate a new way of exercising the primacy. Might this be what the other churches are indeed expecting of him? And when he speaks about a pastoral conversion, he's not simply talking of the papacy. He says that the structures of the universal church must also undergo a pastoral conversion. And in this context, he refers to the role of local bishops and their regional groupings, bishops' conferences. He doesn't want people to expect the Pope to have answers for everything. In fact, excessive centralisation only complicates the Church's life and its missionary outreach, he says. He goes on to say that it's not advisable for the Pope to take the place of local bishops in the discernment of every issue which arises in their territory. And it's as though Francis believes that the papacy will flourish as local bishops' conferences flourish. So might this then be one of the characteristics of the new situation that John Paul alluded to? And the role of the papacy in this new situation would be to facilitate the exchange between the various regions of the Church, so that the pastoral insights of one place can be offered to others, so that they may take them up and apply or adapt them in their own situation. And I think already Francis shows himself to be doing just this. In that apostolic exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel, he regularly quotes from bishops' conferences around the world, his own native Latin America, but also from the USA, from France, from Italy, from Brazil, from India, the Philippines, and the Congo. And this, in fact, I think, goes to the core of the exercise of the primacy for him, because this is really about the unity of the apostolic faith, the witness of the apostles. And in fact, it's probably more focused on the core of the Petrine ministry precisely because it privileges local churches. A ministry of unity exercises its proper role when there's a genuine diversity among local churches. If there's no diversity, we don't need a ministry of unity. And I think in this regard, the Catholic Church has a lot to learn about how to do this. If you think of our history of several centuries, it's not something we do very easily in terms of this dialogue or this relationship between the bishops of the world, despite, I think, our deep desire of many people to see a greater role for local churches. And that's where we can learn from the experience and practice of some of our ecumenical partners. And Pope Francis makes this point when he says that we Catholics have an opportunity to learn from our Orthodox brothers and sisters about the meaning of the collegiality of bishops. Because the East has a strong tradition of synodality. Synodality, which is this system of exchange and dialogue among equals that leads to healthy decision-making. To use an image that Francis used at the beginning of his ministry as the Bishop of Rome, I think what he's saying is that Peter wants to learn from his brother Andrew. And I'm sure that this idea could be extended. Extended, I think, in the direction of learning about synodality from our ecumenical partners that come out of the 16th century Reformation. But perhaps also extended in the direction of other areas of church life that may be strong in one or other of our ecumenical partners and that we can learn from. Let me just return for a moment to the Patriarch of Constantinople. He attended the installation of Pope Francis, or the inaugural Mass of the Petrine Ministry of the Bishop of Rome, as it was called. And in fact, his presence there was a break with a long-established tradition. The Patriarch at the time gave an interview to Turkish television, and during that interview he noted that even before the schism of 1054, the Patriarch of Constantinople never went to Rome for the enthronement of the Pope. And the Patriarch then went on to say that Francis, in his simplicity, had taken us to what was essential, to the heart of things. And in this, said the Patriarch, Pope Francis was sending a message to all churches to correct any tendency to be preoccupied with worldly things and instead to focus on calling all of humanity to live in the love of God. Interestingly, at the installation Mass, Bartholomew was given a chair identical to the one Francis had. And then later on, during the meeting with the ecumenical visitors, Pope Francis addressed him as my brother Andrew. See, here we have Peter and Andrew, these two that go together, these brothers. And I think we can't underestimate the symbolism of what's going on here. In all of our ecumenical dialogues, the symbolism is always important. Sometimes it speaks more loudly than some of the words that we use. So here we had Andrew and Peter together, and that represents a new situation. People have been commenting on it. There's expectation arising around it. I want to turn now to another feature of the Francis papacy, and it's the fact that he's placed great stress on the mercy of God. He wants the Church to proclaim the God of mercy to all, but especially to the weakest and the most vulnerable. And I think that comes from a deep sense of himself, of his own identity. As we've heard already today, and as I think we probably all recall, he gave that interview last year in September to a Jesuit magazine, which was later published in English in the magazine America. And the line that captured the headlines around the world was when the interviewer asked, "Who is Jorge Bergoglio? Who is Pope Francis?" And the Pope answered, "I'm a sinner." That's the most accurate definition. It's not a figure of speech, a literary genre. I'm a sinner. When I heard this, I was reminded of something that Pope John Paul had written in Ut Unum Sint, his encyclical on Christian unity. And when he was speaking about the biblical origins of the papacy in the ministry of Peter, he passed over very quickly from the text of Matthew that most Catholics instinctively go to first of all, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." And instead, Pope John Paul appealed to a series of texts that showed Peter's weakness, even his sinfulness. Texts such as that threefold denial that he knew Jesus. And the point he was making was that the weakness of Peter shows that the church is built on the infinite power of grace. The ministry of Peter, then, is thus fundamentally a ministry of mercy. So how are Francis's words about himself being a sinner heard among our ecumenical partners? If we remember that the fundamental doctrine proposed by the 16th century reformers was about the grace of God, and the fact that on our own we can do nothing to attain salvation, then I believe that our ecumenical partners will warmly welcome his words. In fact, they see the humility of the Pope as a witness to justification by Christ. There are great ecumenical possibilities here, because Francis is speaking a language that can be understood by those whose origins are in the Reformation. There's also another way of looking at this, and to consider why did the 16th century reformers reject the Pope? In brief, it had to do with the power that he possessed at the time, a temporal power that seemed to have little to do with the gospel in the minds of the reformers. Luther's position, as we know, against the Pope hardened as the years went on, but in one of his earlier writings, he spoke of the condition under which he would accept the Pope. This was that all the Pope would do would come under the authority of Christ and be subjected to the test of Scriptures. Now, while Luther eventually came to reject the Pope outright, some of his companions still held out the possibility of reconciliation with the Pope. So Melanchthon conceded that he'd recognise the ministry of the Pope, especially as it pertained to the unity of Christians, if the Pope would accept the gospel. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? And I think in Pope Francis then, our ecumenical partners are seeing a greater focus on the core of the gospel. However, this is not simply a matter of what he called a conversion of the papacy. It's really about a conversion of the whole church. That's what our ecumenical partners will see. That's what's being recognised by our Orthodox and Protestant brothers and sisters. The Patriarch of Constantinople recognised that Francis was leading the church to focus on what is essential to the gospel. And the descendants of the Reformers are noticing the same thing. And Francis reminded us that the teaching of the Second Vatican Council was that we keep in mind the hierarchy of truths. Let's just explore that idea for a moment. The best way to capture it, I think, is to imagine a ball, a sphere, which has a core. And that's what's really important. And everything else on the outside of that needs to be understood in relation to the core. But it also helps us understand the core. And what is that core? It's the mystery of Christ. It's the kingdom of God. It's what John's Gospel calls love. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. So Pope Francis has been calling on the Church to focus on what is essential. And he states outright that we lose sight of this core when we speak more about the Church than about Christ, and more about the Pope than about God's Word. That's a vision for the unity of the whole human family. It's become the focus of his exercise of the papacy. The unity of the Church, which, as I said, is the primary task of the Pope, is never about what he calls mere diplomacy or forced compliance, but it's an indispensable path of evangelisation. This is a new situation, and Pope Francis is showing us how the papacy is being exercised in this new situation. Thank you.